Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. It's welcome into the Hoon. It's been quite a week of news, and it's great to be back here with co-host Peter Bale, talking about news all around the planet and here in Aotearoa as well. Peter, it's been quite, as news junkies, it's been quite a thing.
I know. I've gone straight back to our COVID era, Bernard, when I was waking up at 3 a.m. and reading 16 newspapers at 3 and then sort of worrying about getting to sleep and reading. But I have continued to make a really terrible mistake, which is to watch far too much Twitter. And I am now subscribed to various people like David Sachs, who was the founder of a company called Yammer, which was sold to Microsoft for several billion dollars. And he is now a big Trump supporter.
No! What is it with all those tech people?
Yeah, I know.
Used to be
and
nice,
I follow
and then
Elon.
Now they've all gone bad.
Exactly. And we should discuss that, actually, our bias on that. I think we might need a little minute, sort of possibly in this first thing before we get to Castle on the Climate, to discuss bias and where we come from. But I've been slightly stressing out about that exact thing of just there being too much news in too short a period. I mean, do you remember when Trump, there was an assassination attempt against Trump? That's 9 days ago, and it feels like a year. There is, I think it was Lenin who said, some days feel like a decade, and then some decades feel like a day. It's quite extraordinary like that. And of course, we've got Netanyahu speaking today. We've got Kamala Harris, who seems to have been anointed as the Democratic successor. People are looking at Joe Biden today, and as long as he could get out his, hostage statement and show a newspaper to show that he in fact is alive today, he's survived the day. It's a pretty extraordinary period, and that's just in the US. But I guess, it's a reference point to how US politics influences all the rest of us.
And it's through those networks. I mean, it's still beggars belief to me that hugely important political, social issues in the United States have become part of our own discussions here from both sides.
All sorts of unpleasant ways. I've been following. Actually, speaking of unpleasant, I've made the mistake of following Brian Tamaki because I find him quite an interesting political phenomenon in New Zealand. And I actually find him he's kind of the 21st century mongrel mob, really, because I think he appeals to a certain demographic. But his whole thing at the moment about the rainbow people and trans, I think, is extremely effective and quite toxic. And it concerns me about not just about it being toxic, but that trans issue, whether it's J.K. Rowling or it's Brian Tamaki, which I don't think those two have probably ever been combined in the same sentence, J.K. Rowling and Brian Tamaki, but or let alone Elon Musk, who of course did an interview this week with one of the silliest men in the entire planet, as far as I'm concerned, Jordan Peterson, who is the Canadian eccentric psychologist who, argues that essentially, the success of women over the last 30 years has been incredibly at the expense of men. And Elon said his son had died. His son Xavier, who had converted to, who has transitioned, had died. It was dead to him now, in a sense. And, these issues are very powerful, and they've got very powerful people linking into them. But I think we should possibly do an entire Hoon on the trans issue, Bernard. What could possibly go wrong?
No. These are distractionary culture war things. They have been weaponized by people who don't want us to talk about the real issues, which are housing, climate, and poverty. And this week,
gosh, Bernard, that's a very mature way to put that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I've learnt over the years, and it's taken me a long time to to screen out an awful lot of stuff, a lot of noise.
Mm.
And I know others will still be talking about it and thinking about it and voting on it, but it's taken me a long time to sort of focus everything on the three things that matter, I think, for us here. In fact, anywhere in the world.
Well, you just
really.
mentioned two. What's the third?
Housing, climate, and poverty.
Yeah.
And this week, we've had a huge sort of landmark report on what poverty actually looks like and maybe how it was created and how it's perpetuating itself in Aotearoa. And that is abuse in state care.
Gosh.
And abuse in...
That's an interesting segue then, Bernard, that you make that connection to poverty. I mean, I would as well, but explain or elaborate.
Yeah, I've spent a good part of the last day or so reading through as many of the 3,000 pages as I can of the abuse and care report. It's been well constructed. Actually, there's been a lot of people there working in a journalistic way, investigative journalistic way, to understand what happened in some of these institutions, schools, care homes, and it is absolutely awful in that, for example, 70 to 80% of the people in the Black Power are from state care. When you look at the overwhelming impact on Māori in particular, and how it's been one of those tools used by those in power to essentially make sure that poverty keeps going down the generations. And some of the stuff in particular, the sort of bureaucratic details of how people were discouraged from taking legal action, discouraged from asking for compensation from the government, how the Crown Law Office was weaponized to stop people from making claims. And sadly, it all comes back
and the guilt. And the guilt is pervasive. I mean, I was just, because we sometimes talk on them, just to prevent you going into a total soliloquy before Catherine comes on, but or to head you off slightly in that direction, we would not have this abuse inquiry had not Aaron Smale done extraordinary work for your old shop newsroom, which exposed, I think, particularly Lake Alice, but then it opened out more broadly. And I think, am I right in remembering that he was a victim of abuse and has become a really sophisticated journalist in explaining this? And so, you know, it's a great credit to you when you were there, but also to Mark Jennings and Tim Murphy to have supported Aaron Smale exposing all of this stuff, because I just don't think that without that journalism we would have had the provocation to set up the royal inquiry. Isn't that correct?
Yes, there's been lots of people who've worked on this, and I'm very proud of the work that Newsroom did in raising these stories again and again, taking all sorts of risks and doing all sorts of incredibly difficult and often not seen work. Because whenever you expose an awful injustice like these, you get absolutely swamped from people saying, it happened to me too, and other people saying, oh, that's just a bunch of whiny lefty losers. They should just go back into their box. And it is incredibly draining and difficult. So I admire people who work in exposing these issues. And I hope in future we'll get a chance to talk to some of the people who have done a lot of work academically as well.
Bernard, what were the say? Were there two or three items in that report? Sorry, Catherine, I'm just pushing Bernard fractionally more. You've come in 60 seconds earlier than we expected, slightly. But what were two or three things in that report that really struck you? Because I have a couple I want to mention.
Yes, I have found the case studies. There's about 5 of them in the back of the report. So difficult to read, but so informative, so real. You know, you're talking about places that I remember driving past, people that I remember saying that they had family who'd been there, things you'd heard about second or third hand, and you thought, oh, really? Is it that bad? And then actually getting the detail, reported, checked, properly contextualized, and you know it's there's a lot to it. And so it's the sort of thing you could dip in and out of. It's not a fun read. We're not talking, beach time reading, but it is telling us a huge story about ourselves and helping to explain some of the enormous pain and dysfunction we have in our society. I cannot believe that anyone who's read through these reports, the same people can then stand up and decide to kick down
Exactly,
at those
exactly.
people who are in trouble. And the gangs in particular. I mean, I'm sure there's an awful lot of criminality and awfulness and
But what we have to look at the,
yeah,
tough on
why?
crime and tough on the causes of crime, as
What
Tony Blair
happened to
said.
what? Every one of those gang members was a kid,
Yeah, yeah,
and that
exactly.
kid would have been the cutest and most fantastic, loveliest kid.
Yeah,
How did they turn into a gang member?
exactly.
And when you're the prime minister, and maybe we'll talk about this later, for him to stand up and talk about, I'm sick of the gang members.
Yeah,
That's what he said. And for the likes of Paul Goldsmith saying that, now it's time for the justice system to come for the gang members. That's the sort of stuff they've been saying the last 6 to 12 months.
yeah,
And gee, go and read those case studies, guys,
exactly.
and tell us that you've got the same views. But
Exactly. So Bernard, let me do mine, then we'll better move to the climate, which will be hugely optimistic, I know. I was really struck by three things in that report, which was the percentage of the Catholic diocesan clergy, which was 14% were involved or accused in that period of the covered by the, which is 1.5 out of 10, 1.5 out of 10, and then of all religious orders, 8% of male members of religious orders were. So they're using, I mean, in all of these situations, and then there was one in Levin, a state organization institution in Levin, where the officials were creating kind of events where people from the region could come in and abuse children. They were essentially selling children in their care to be abused. And I was also very struck, Bernard, by the Dilworth case, which is, I think, the worst or the most kind of an institutionalized case that's discussed, which we kind of know a little bit about, but also the boot camp on Great Barrier. And if anything should pull everybody's head in a little bit on the boot camp idea, it's that, because it was unspeakable. And you're constantly creating environments for this kind of situation to occur. I mean, the point is, we have, as a state, as individuals, as churches, created environments where people who want to exploit people can exploit people. I also think that, but again, sorry, I will move straight on to Catherine. We have to think about New Zealand's place in the rest of the world in this. This is something that Canada is facing. Australia's already faced up to some extent. Ireland and the United States. And I think it would actually be quite interesting for us, and I might organise a couple of people to come in and talk about how other countries have reacted to their same discovery. Undiscovered bodies and all that kind of stuff. So forgive me.
yes,
Catherine,
no, you're
cheer us
right.
up
It's
on
a
the environment.
huge issue. And Catherine, talking of huge issues that dominate our lives for now and forever, the climate and what's happening with the temperature, and we do have some actual news from the last few days about the climate. Tell us about that.
So the news that I've been covering this week is about a UN task force that was set up by Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, to look at the use by companies of carbon offsets, primarily through the voluntary carbon market. And so that task force has produced a report, and the report has not been officially publicly released yet, but the Financial Times say that they've seen it and they're reporting on it, and what they're saying is that the UN is about to come out in force against the use of carbon credits by companies to offset the greenhouse gas emissions, at least anything outside of government regulated markets. And so this is of course related to So over the last few years, we've had kind of like this whole series of report after report after study, kind of saying, looking into these voluntary carbon markets and finding these massive integrity issues with them, whereby they haven't actually reduced emissions by anything like the amount that they claim. There's all sorts of problems with their methodologies. That they're mostly investing in forestry, which is impermanent. And so, if you get a wildfire or a pest or something like that, that kills off half the trees, you've lost your carbon storage. And also with the fact that, a lot of the Indigenous and local communities where those projects take place haven't given free and prior informed consent to have that going on in the spaces where their livelihoods depend on. So yeah, it's just I guess a response to all of that long, all of those problems that we've had in those markets, and what the companies that are, some of the biggest companies that are using carbon offsets to make claims about their sort of climate friendliness, A, fossil fuel companies, and B, the big tech companies like Amazon and Apple and Microsoft. Yeah, so that's kind of quite new that it's landed. It's not, like I said, the report hasn't been officially published yet. Within the Financial Times article, there's already a guy from BP who was expressing a lot of outrage that anybody would consider putting a stop to all the climate finance that's going from companies into the developing world. So
but we probably need both, don't we?
The climate finance.
No, but you probably need climate finance solutions to this as well as...
The question, though, Peter, is whether the use of that finance and these offsets is actually distracting us from the core need to reduce emissions.
Absolutely. No, I think it's definitely right. When we talked last week about that Microsoft and Occidental deal, which is about carbon capture. So, I mean, it's in a way that corporate stuff is it's a macrocosm rather than a microcosm of what's going on with governments, including the New Zealand government.
And what the Secretary General is saying in that report is, companies need to just focus on reducing their own emissions and not be so focused on these big kind of claims that they can make around, we're going to be, net zero by this date, or we're going to be carbon neutral by this date. Actually, what you need to do is just accept that this is complex and sometimes difficult, and just get busy with the business of actually reducing your own emissions and not trying to offset them somewhere else. My expectation is that once that report goes public, that there will be a lot of pushback, because these are big markets. There's a lot of money swimming around in them, and there are a lot of companies involved in them that aren't going to want to just stop because the UN says it's bad. So that's going to get interesting, I think.
And just thinking about the actual temperatures in the last few days and what that's doing to our ice caps on both ends of the planet, what are we hearing?
Yeah, well, we had some temperature records, right, in the last few days. Not that you'd notice here in windy Wellington anyway, it's still been quite cold, but globally, it was the hottest day ever. Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday?
We actually had 2 days in a row. So it was like Sunday and then Monday. So it was the new record on Sunday, and then we went again the next day for all-time record highs. And this is surprising a lot of people, because, as I think you've been saying for the last year or so, Catherine, we were withholding judgment on the big jumps in temperatures in the last 18 months to 2 years because of El Nino. But now that El Nino has faded away and we're now closer to a La Nina, the temperatures are staying up, and that is the worry, isn't it?
It's very worrying that the temperatures are still as high as they are, and that we're still setting new records. And, there's a lot of people that are still saying, just wait, La Nina's going to kick in and then the temperatures will come down. I hope so, but it's not looking great for the camp that are saying that climate sensitivity is not as high as the likes of James Hansen are saying.
And also, it's obviously having an impact on our ice cover. You can see too in the ice coverage charts that we're heading back towards those record low levels of ice cover that we had, particularly during the middle of the year. And some satellite images I've discovered of the Thwaites Glacier, the so-called Doomsday Glacier, which is the thing plugging up the bit of ice, the West Antarctic ice sheet, that if it comes off, and no one's expecting that in the next day or two, but if it does come off, it sends up.
Jesus, I'd go to higher ground if I were you, Bernard, if it does.
A good few meters of sea level rise just on that alone, showing that it's really crumbled away in the last 3 or 4 weeks, which isn't great.
Yeah, it's really astonishing, those satellite images, and I'm really, it'll be interesting to hear from the experts on what the meaning of that is, because I think, it's not like the sea level just suddenly appears once, it will take many years for that to play out.
Yep.
But the problem is, once that plug is gone, the fact that it will play out becomes inevitable. It means that no matter if you stop warming the planet tomorrow, that ice sheet is going to keep,
So, Catherine, on a sort of New Zealand basis, after our conversation last week, and I'm not saying it was directly related, it was interesting to see the climate minister on with Jack Tame on Television New Zealand, getting asked some very difficult questions, which we had discussed on the podcast last week about what's that expression? And is it a rugby expression about doing something so slow that nobody really understands what's going on, that you just do everything. You look as though you're taking action, but you're not taking action. That's what the government's currently doing. Slow rolling, is it slow rolling? Is that the expression that I'm looking for?
I don't know all the rugby expressions.
No, nor do I. Well, I've given you a bloody hospital pass there, Catherine. The first time I heard the word hospital pass, I really had to
quickly Google
ask somebody. I quickly Googled it, because it was when Judith Collins took over from what's his name. And I think she said, I've been given a hospital pass. And then I saw it come up the other day with the Te Whatu Ora stuff. And I thought, well, at least hospital pass is being used in the right context. But seriously, what did you make of the climate minister's rather awkward stance the other day?
Well, it's difficult for him to really defend himself when he's coming under some of those sustained really good questions, because they are really good questions, and I don't think he's really got very good answers. I think the other thing that came out right after we spoke, right after the Hoon last week, is there was a piece on the news that night, and there's subsequently been an interview that RNZ did with the head of the Forestry Institute, basically saying that the government's modelling for planting trees is wrong, that they're only going to plant about half as many as the government has modelled over the next year or two, and that's not even something that you can change easily. Like, you have to have grown all the seedlings and all the rest of it in order to be actually be able to go out and plant them. So
we
is a big hole
we plant the seeds. Nature grows the seeds. As Neil said, in the young ones, which you're probably too young to remember the young ones. Speaking of the young ones, here's Robert.
Great segue. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
Hi, Robert.
Robert, which member of the young ones did you identify?
Sorry, you've cut out.
The question Peter was going to ask is which member
Neil,
of the...
Neil the hippie? I can't imagine it would have been Neil Simon. Which member of the young ones did you identify with?
None of them, I don't think.
Were you the studious? You were the studious student then, rather than
hardly, no.
Yes. Well, that's why you're a highly regarded professor, dishing out
Failed.
doctorates as he goes.
Failed as a professional footballer. That's how I started.
We must talk about that. I think
here.
actually we might have to do that as a segue, because
I failed. Sorry, I never made it as a professional footballer. I aspired to be one, but
Yes.
many thousands of kids in the UK, I didn't succeed.
Now, how are you getting on? What are you? You've been. I saw you on Sean Plunkett the other day, which worried the hell out of me, because I thought, oh my God. But then I think that's for in your position, you should be.
I've
reaching
known
all
Sean many
audiences.
years, and before he was on the platform, and he used to work for RNZ.
Yes, I know.
And he used to speak to me occasionally then. And I always take the view that since he's only talking to me about foreign affairs, then that doesn't mean I necessarily sympathise with the.
Look, Robert, you're combating ignorance across all platforms, and we appreciate it very much.
And it's great.
I think Sean gets quite a lot of heat for having me on his program.
Oh, good. That's good. Focus the heat. It's like one of those magnifying glasses, into a very concentrated space. Robert, wonderful to have you on, in particular this week after, geopolitics seems to spin on a dime and go in a different direction as we were talking at the top of the show with Peter, 9 days ago we had an assassination attempt on the US president, and it seems like years ago. And bizarrely, it seems to have, pushed the Democrats over the line into finally getting rid, so to speak, of Biden as a candidate.
Yes, I think Mr. Biden was always in trouble after his disastrous debate with Mr. Trump, but I think he was given a sort of period of probation where he had a chance to redeem himself. The problem is that the opportunities that he had, he did not really fully convince the skeptics. He had a very difficult interview with George Stephanopoulos, and also his chairing of the NATO summit, while I think was reasonably efficient, he did, again, introduced, I think, President Zelensky as President Putin, which for his critics was confirmation that he's a bit of a sort of a loose cannon.
Yeah.
But yes, you mentioned, Bernard, the attempted assassination. I think that was another, if you like, push towards replacing the leader of the Democrats, because I think although it took the conversation away from Mr. Biden's leadership for a few days, as soon as Mr. Trump recovered somewhat, it became apparent that he may, at least in the eyes of the Democrats, experience quite a bounce or boost in the polls. And I think that probably, I think there was also a cumulative realization amongst senior Democrats that Mr. Trump was there for the taking if only they had a more energetic candidate. Because many people, quite rightly, drew attention to Biden's appalling performance during the first debate on the 27th of June with Mr. Trump. But on the other hand, Mr. Trump didn't exactly distinguish himself by not answering any of the questions. I think it was an American commentator said he was the first person to win a presidential debate without answering a single question.
Well, but it's just in order to stop us segueing into different areas, because I was going to start with a different area, but we're now on this one. Last week we talked about what a Trump-Vance ticket might mean, and it seemed kind of weirdly inevitable. And of course, in these decades that happen in weeks now or in days, we now have an heir apparent in Kamala Harris.
Yeah,
we don't know who her deputy vice president will be. I mean, I would suspect it's the astronaut rather than the Jewish person from Pennsylvania. But
the astronaut.
All right, that's my prediction is the astronaut from Arizona, as opposed
Mr.
to
Kelly,
the Jewish person from Mr. Shapiro from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania. Let's ask that same question we did last week about a Trump-Vance presidency and what that might mean for foreign affairs. Do you have a thought on what a Harris presidency might mean for foreign affairs?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Peter, because I'm sure you've noticed, I know you've just done a really interesting piece in The Listener, so I'm sure you would have noticed that there was a piece in the Washington Post today from Karen Attiah, and she argues the first thing that Kamala Harris has to clean up on the foreign policy front is what she calls Mr. Biden's horrible policy towards Gaza. And interestingly, Kamala Harris was not in town as Mr. Netanyahu gave his big speech in Washington. She said diplomatically she already had a prior engagement. I think it was in Indianapolis, but
we've all got prior engagements on that one. Robert, we all could have been there this weekend, but we just decided not to.
But I get a feeling there was another very interesting piece in The Guardian by a former official of the Biden administration who worked or was associated with Harris's office, the vice president's office, and said there was quite a debate going on behind the scenes with Kamala Harris disagreeing with the president's hardline policy towards the Palestinians, as the writer of the article put it.
Well, that's handy.
And it sort of, I think, telegraphed or hinted that there might be quite a bit of a change. She also pointed out that Kamala Harris was uneasy about the legal implications of the United States position in relation to Gaza, which of course plays into the fact that she was a prosecutor in California, is a lawyer, has legal training, and therefore takes international law perhaps more seriously than some of the people who've been responsible for running policy.
Before we move on to Netanyahu's performance today in addressing both houses, which of course was a Republican setup to deliberately embarrass Biden, as it was at least out of the other 3 times. It's the fourth time he's addressed. What do you now think? Now that it's very hard to know, it seems to me, what Kamala Harris thinks about foreign affairs. But would it be? Do you imagine that a Kamala Harris led Kamala Harris presidency would essentially be an extension of the Biden foreign affairs period with Antony personalities, even Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, all of those kinds of people, or is it? Do you see?
Well,
a
it's a
different
good
direction?
question, because I would say, in direct response to your question, I think it will be an incremental shift rather than a dramatic change. That won't satisfy, of course, some of the pro-hawkish voices in favour of Netanyahu, both in the Democratic Party and the Republican, even more widespread in the Republican Party. But there is a powerful political incentive for Kamala Harris to adjust her policy, i.e. engage in an incremental shift, because a lot of young people vowed they would not vote for Biden, and she's probably quite interested in the contest about Trump and maximising her vote.
Absolutely.
So she'll probably want to reclaim the disaffected young people in the United States who's, and give them something, give them an indication that she wasn't fully on board with what many people see as a one-sided American policy.
All right, so are we okay? Let's because we keep sliding back to Netanyahu, which we'll come back to in a minute. Because I do recommend people get the Listener over the weekend if they're not, because there's a piece in it by me about Israeli isolation, or it was really prompted by the idea that Israel isolates world as opposed to the other way around. But Robert, what are the other? Are there any implications about Ukraine, for example?
No, I think Kamala Harris is a hardliner on Ukraine. I don't think there'll be any change there. And I think she may even raise the issue to contrast herself with Mr. Trump in the days and weeks ahead. I do think Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance must be particularly Mr. Trump. I think they had reckoned on Joe Biden limping onto the election. And now they have a ticket which is committed to abolishing abortion nationally, and they're going to be confronted in a debate, or at least Mr. Trump is, by a woman of colour who will have much more authenticity.
You mean a single
speaking on this issue? It won't be a pale
lady.
white guy defending the rights of women. It will be, and I think that's going to be potent politically. Also, the age gap between Kamala Harris and Mr. Trump is huge. So it's a bit of a, Mr. Trump was always going on about how old Joe was when he was about 3 years younger. But in fact, the gap between Mr. Trump and Miss Harris is enormous.
Okay, last question before we move on to the Netanyahu ICC thing. Oh, sorry, but the boy in the back with his hand up.
Yes, just one question for you, Robert, on AUKUS and China, and whether Kamala Harris as a president would be more acceptable or more interested in AUKUS than Biden was, because that's a key question for us. The difference between a Biden-led United States and a Trump-led United States, at least in a perception sense, is quite big when we have to think about whether or not we join AUKUS too. But what does Kamala Harris think about China and AUKUS?
That's a difficult one, because as vice president, her role was largely ceremonial. And although she was given certain responsibilities for migration and then the reproductive rights of women, I don't think she made a great impression with the first responsibility, but with the second, she acquitted herself well, apparently. So on China, I think I think she'd probably pursue a policy similar to Biden on China. Why do I say that? Because
it's good that you ask yourself the questions, Robert.
Because there's a near consensus. There's not much that unites many Americans, but one is their desire all to remain number one, whether they're Democrats or Republicans in the world, and secondly, the perception that China is the biggest threat to that status. And there does seem to be a near consensus within American politics across the aisle, as the Americans like to say, in an otherwise polarized society, that China is a major threat to American interests in the world. So I wouldn't I don't think she would necessarily want to swim against that near consensus.
Yeah, interesting. So another specific news question that actually relates to New Zealand, weirdly enough. So we had the Houthi drone attack on Tel Aviv and the remarkable Israeli response to set fire to most of Hodeidah in Yemen. What do you think that means for New Zealand, since we have a half a dozen people sitting in Qatar, I suspect, is where it is, trying to keep the Houthi thing? I think there's clearly an implication there, and the New Zealand mission on the Houthis has just been extended, correct?
Yes, it has. I think it's a team of 6 people, largely intelligence staff from the NZDF. We've discussed this before. I think anything that if a New Zealand NZDF member is harmed, and we hope they're not, of course, but if they were, I think it could be a severe problem for the government. And the reason being, the government had, in the United Nations, had pursued an immediate humanitarian truce and then demanded a ceasefire. And they, nevertheless, despite the fact the US kept vetoing that prospect in the Security Council, said yes when they were asked to contribute to containing the symptoms or the consequences of America's refusal to have a ceasefire. I mean, let's be quite clear about this. And there's a lot of confusion around this. The activities of the Houthis in the Red Sea are clearly illegal, an affront to international law. They're attacking civilian commercial shipping. But that is a derivative from the lawless situation in Gaza, where Israel is acting in a disproportionate manner and failing to distinguish between civilians and militants. The Houthi Red Sea campaign began on the 19th of November, 6 weeks after Israel's policy of mighty vengeance, in Mr. Netanyahu's words, began.
Yeah, so good segue. So Benjamin Netanyahu said today, I mean, having come with various members of the hostage families, many of there were also equally hostage families protesting against his arrival. Yes. So, and I think that's a really good reminder that in any issues around Israel, there are Jewish people on all sides of those discussions. Because I had a conversation on Twitter this week with somebody who's pursuing both you and me about being too pro, or allegedly pro-Hamas, which of course I'm not, and I wouldn't say you were, or anti-Israel, put it that way. But Netanyahu called all of those protesters in the US useful idiots of Iran, which is of course a classic Soviet slur. Yeah. What did you make of Netanyahu's speech today and its effectiveness or otherwise? Because one thing that's worth pointing out, if people don't know this, that half of the Democrats did not turn up. Half of the House and half of the Congress, more or less, take it or leave it, didn't turn up. Many young people who work in Congress did not turn up for work today, in fact. And so the sight of that room being filled, that hall being filled, is slightly deceptive. It isn't bipartisan by any means.
No, I think Mr. Netanyahu gave the sort of speech that we'd expect from him. He's not going to take a step back. He blasted the protesters in Washington and elsewhere, and he's equated his critics of even being useful idiots of Hamas or being anti-Semitic, which he's really saying is the state of Israel and his leadership is above criticism. And you quoted Gideon Levy in your excellent article, Peter.
My what? Did you say excellent?
Yes.
Could you just say that again, please?
Thank you. Enough, team.
It's all recorded, so you don't need me to say it again.
That's right.
Thank you.
It'll become a bit
coming
boring
out in the
otherwise.
edit, boy.
Yeah.
Next week's listener, coming to a
Yes.
Anyway,
shop near you.
Gideon Levy makes the point that this equating anti-Semitism with any criticism of Israel is baloney, and the point you made earlier is that many of the protesters against Israel's policy, particularly in the United States, are from young Jewish activists.
Yeah.
And someone like Gideon Levy has been admittedly a bit of a lone voice in Israel, although I suspect his people are beginning to support his position more in light of the events relating to the hostages. But also, I think there's a growing suspicion that Mr. Netanyahu may be seeking to widen the conflict, as you say in your article. Gaza becomes
My excellent article, I think we call that, don't we?
Yes.
Thank you, Robert.
Don't overdo it, PC.
Jesus, I have so little opportunity. But thank you.
Yeah, as Biden said to Netanyahu, you should pocket the victory and accept it.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't. I think it was very much a speech for his Republican friends.
Yeah.
And he's made no secret that he'd love Mr. Trump to
and
win
he's
the election.
he's shat on Biden so comprehensively since October the 7th.
The bear hug
It's
strategy
quite
didn't
remarkable.
work, did it?
No, and I thought it might, and my daughter thinks I was incredibly naive to think it might, and she's the one audience I actually care about, apart from you and Bernard, of course. But it's been. I think that is a remarkable speech today. I noticed also that Anshel Pfeffer, his biographer of the recent book Bibi, likened him to the Maccabees, who effectively, it's worth looking up if the Maccabees and what Anshel Pfeffer, his biographer, is saying about a man who essentially burned Israel to the ground to defend his own position, and the Maccabees apparently did that with the Romans. I need Simon Sebag Montefiore on the phone right now to help me with this.
We'll look forward to him as the next guest on the Hoon.
Simon
Thank you very
Sebag
much.
Montefiore or the
Yes.
Maccabees or Anshel Pfeffer. Actually, that's a bloody good idea. All right,
Yeah,
I'll
Simon,
try.
get him on.
Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on. Lovely to have you on. And
Great to
we
see
welcome back into the Hoon Julianne Genter from Wellington.
We've missed you, Julianne. I've missed you anyway. It's been ages.
It's great to have you on, Julianne. Can you hear us there? She can't hear us. Is that right at the moment? Let me just see.
Julianne, can you hear us?
Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes,
So let me just see if I can.
but
We can see you and we can hear you, but we can't.
You can't
it looks
hear
like
us,
You can't
correct.
hear us. So, here we go. I think we're changing now to the speakers. Can you hear us there now, Julianne?
try one more time, Bernard.
I think I'm not able to. Let's see if that works. Julianne, hello. Are you there?
Is it possible? Oh, shit, hang on.
Oh, it's all right. I'm going to ask. Right. Let me. Sorry about this, people. We will be with you in a second. Yes. Right. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to ask Julie Ann to go out and come back, and we might be able to get her back on the sound then, because it's been a busy old time in transport. We've had Simeon Brown, hard at it. He's the hardest working cabinet minister.
I mean, he's like David Seymour. He's incredibly annoying and incredibly effective.
Yes, he's always there, and he's always coming up with new announcements or announcements that seem new but aren't that new. And I'm wondering if we can hear you there, Julianne.
Can you hear us now, Julianne?
Julianne, no, we can't. That's
Still not
interesting.
working.
Speakers. Let's see if I can. No, that's weird, isn't it? Sorry about that.
Must be a problem on my end.
It's.
Do you have any?
I'm just wondering.
Hello?
Let's see if we can get Sorry about this, team. We're gonna persist, I think. Can you? Okay. We're
Oh,
gonna try.
actually, someone as somebody points out here, Harmless Solution says, let's just bring CrowdStrike. Very good idea.
That's a good.
Oh,
Yes.
can you hear me then, Juliet?
No. I think
Julianne?
this is. I'm going to ask Julianne to come back with another device, and this is going to be cut out in the edit. I think, Peter.
Yes.
CrowdStrike. I think CrowdStrike. Just imagine being that coder, that 23-year-old who finishes up work, says to his boss, "Here's the code. I've finished with it. Check it out. Throw it into the tester. I'm off to the party." 2:00 in the morning, they're asleep, and they get the phone call from the boss.
You say that because what was interesting about it, of course, is that it was non-US markets that were most affected by. I mean, everybody was affected by it, but it was first picked up in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia because it was a code push from the United States. So it affected the markets that were, because you do these things. I've worked in tech company. I worked at Microsoft, which and I was not running Windows. Although if anybody needs me to help them to Control Alt Delete, I can help them do that. But it was designed. The code push was done so that in a way that affected this market, New Zealand. Probably Gisborne. I suspect Gisborne was the first. If there are any computers in Gisborne at all, Gisborne was probably the first affected by it around the world. Yeah, it's an extraordinary indication of total dependence.
Yeah, and how what we think is a diversified world where there's backups for Africa and redundancies all over the place. Turns out when you are reliant on one particular company, you are building in instability.
Yeah, I was really struck, Bernard, actually, because as you know, I'm a Formula One fan, which I know we can't tell Catherine, because although I think in 2026, Formula One will be net zero, allegedly, probably from buying carbon offsets somewhere else. But
why don't they just go to electric? There is a Formula E.
They're hybrid. They're hybrid. They're already hybrids, Bernard. Just in 2026, it's 50-50. Just shut up. But Lewis Hamilton's team, Mercedes, is sponsored by CrowdStrike, and I expected to see a big sticking plaster over the CrowdStrike sponsorship on Sunday for the Hungarian Grand Prix, but it wasn't there. Julianne, can you hear us?
Can you hear us now, Julianne?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic.
I had to change the setting on my computer.
No.
Sorry.
That's all right. Lovely to see you. We're really pleased to have you back on the Hoon again, and as much because it's been such a big week in transport for us policy geeks. This is heaven. Although it sounds like hell when you want to spend $10 billion on a motorway that lasts 100 kilometres, $100 million a kilometre. Twice as expensive as Transmission Gully. What did you make of the government's announcement of the Northern Expressway?
I mean, it's very much in line with what the current transport minister has been pushing and what the National Party has increasingly been focused on. It just seems like they're totally obsessed with the idea of certain big infrastructure projects, no matter what the cost or no matter what the impact. For a coalition government that supposedly cares about value for money and outcomes, this is the exact opposite of that. But there doesn't seem to be any reasoning with them about that.
And the idea of putting it all together into one big, long PPP, what are the risks there for the taxpayer from a financial sense, apart from anything else, but also from a long-term point of view? One of the risks with PPPs is they really tie the hands of any governments down the track. I mean, it's possible the Green Party could be in a government in a couple of years' time or 6 years' time and want to stop it, but can't because of these PPPs.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because there's been huge pressure on governments to carry on with contracts that have been signed, and yet this government has cancelled contracts that have been signed, like for the inter-island ferries, which is going to be a terrible decision, which will cost us just as much for a worse outcome, I think, in the long run. But I think the downside of using a PPP for highways like this, as we've seen with Transmission Gully and with Puhoi to Warkworth is that it doesn't add anything. We already use the private sector to design, construct, and build and maintain our highways. This is really just about accessing finance, and it's private finance, which then makes it more expensive. Not to mention the fact that then you're just paying tons of lawyers to argue over the contract all through the construction process. So
and then after the construction too, when they go over budget and we have to sue them or they sue us.
Or half of the Brynderwen Hills falls into the new Brynderwen thing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing is there's definitely work that's going to need to be done to improve the resilience of the current route. And going for a 4-lane expressway, the entire route, all rolled up in one PPP, almost guarantees that there won't be any improvements to the existing road in that time, and it will take much longer to deliver an outcome that benefits the people of Northland.
And just looking too at the announcement this morning from Simeon Brown about the railway investments in the bottom half of the North Island, which if you'd arrived from another planet, you think, wow, Simeon Brown announcing a train. Gee, that's interesting. But tell us...
Not if you'd come from the same planet that he comes from, but
no.
yeah, carry on.
but if you are... if you've been listening to the governments of various flavours for the last decade or so, you'll know there's a bit more complication in that story. What's going on there?
Well, I think it's pretty telling that Chris Bishop and Nicola Willis, I think, were at the announcement, or at least Nicola Willis was. I definitely think it's local Wellington MPs who are ministers who are influential in cabinet that have meant that this promise was kept. Although I know Gwyn Compton, who used to work for the National Party in the John Key years, put out a press release criticizing the move as a broken promise because it's for fewer trains than what National campaigned on, and there's no.
I saw your tweet about that, and I was wondering what that meant. Yeah, interesting.
Well, so the previous government was looking at an option, and what the local partners want is one that can use the overhead electric lines and a battery, so we don't have to. And it's not complicated technology these days to have dual mode or tri-mode trains, because we've got, of course, a different level of electricity in our overhead wires all the way down to Palmerston North than what we have in Wellington. And then,
I'm surprised we don't have a different gauge on the tracks, actually. But yeah.
It's one thing we do have is the same narrow gauge everywhere. But contrary to popular belief, there are plenty of places with narrow gauge railways that run effective passenger services, like Japan and Queensland. But so I guess it's essentially he's just announced that they're going ahead with what Labour committed to in their last budget, which was 18 trains, and Simeon Brown has pushed for there to be an investigation of diesel propulsion.
Goody!
He wants to.
Can we not get tobacco propulsion?
I think they're going to work out that actually the electric propulsion.
Electricity is really cool for trains, in
the lifetime of the project. So.
Yeah, well, maybe he just needs to hook up a bunch of double cab utes in a line. And use
Bernard,
that instead.
Stop it.
Sorry, we're having too much fun.
One other thing about this is that under the current GPS and the transport budget, my understanding is that NZTA is asking, or is trying to reduce the central government financial assistance funding for that service. So until those trains come in 5 years, the service may actually be at threat, because if they reduce central government contribution to the funding,
interesting.
The regional councils might not be able to cover the cost on their own.
Well, that's an interesting, because there's an interesting comparison with that, Julian, because this, as you know, Rishi Sunak in the UK cancelled HS2, and what that's now meant is that there's going to be pressure on some of the related routes, and the train companies in the UK are saying we're going to have to do demand moderation because there'll be too many people wanting, which means higher ticket prices. But on this particular one, are we being unfair? Should we not just think actually more trains into the Wairarapa? It's great. Having lived in the Wairarapa in the 1870s, I never thought of it as a sort of commuter belt, but it is now. So is this a good thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's really, really good. And the regional, like our Green chair of the Wellington Regional Council, the chair of the transport subcommittee on that, Thomas Nash is very happy. This is something they've all been campaigning on for several years, and it's a big step in the right direction that they're able to go out with the with the RFP. So it's good that they're going to go ahead and order the trains. But we will need a campaign to save the Capital Connection service in the next 5 years. And of course hopefully they'll go with electric options even,
But it's such a no-brainer for New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah.
To go with electric.
Of course, no matter what your values are, it's
I
hard
admit
to
I saw the other day that somebody is selling a batch. I think it's on the East Cape or near the East Cape. No, around New Plymouth, I'm sorry. That is made of it's a section and a batch made of one of the, you won't remember this because you probably weren't here at this time. It was the rather beautiful stainless steel and aluminium overnight train from Auckland to Wellington called the Silver Star. And one of the carriages, which is looking rather worse for its wear, is now a batch, somewhere New Plymouth. It's for sale right now if you'd like it. But we've been through the legacy of not having commuter or decent rail in New Zealand, and it's not going to get any better, is it?
No, that's right. Just finally, Julianne, on the issue.
Not finally, Bernard.
Okay. Well, for me at least.
Yeah.
Dad and Dad are fighting, unfortunately. Just finally,
we are the two gay parents of this Hoon, and carry on.
Chaz and Dave, just the cheese guys. Just finally for me, Julianne, on road safety and speed limits. It seems to me that the Transport Minister is getting himself into a pickle here because in his keenness to get on with it and hustle the economy along faster, that he's actually alienating a whole bunch of local voters who don't want trucks and cars speeding past schools, whatever hour of the day. And it's clear from the stats, even in the short time we did have lower speed limits, that it's actually improved the accident rates and no doubt reduced some emissions as well. What's your view on the chances that this is going to trip Simeon Brown up, either politically or legally?
Yeah, I do think he's really opened himself up to legal risk. And I don't want to be overly optimistic about that, but he is required to take safety into account, and it's pretty clear that he's not doing that in any detailed way. And of course, we've asked for all of the advice, and it's been delayed under the OIA. We've asked from both the Ministry of Transport side and NZTA. I think just the votes from the councils really show how out of touch he is, because it's not like Auckland Council is stacked with Green left councillors, and yet they overwhelmingly voted to oppose the new rule. I think he's really just got ahead of himself, and this is an example of where he's someone who has spent his political career in opposition, campaigning on kind of populist issues, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to make the transition to, now he's in an important governing role, and he has certain legal responsibilities and certain moral responsibilities and political.
Oh no, but we'll get rid of the cones, Julianne. We'll get rid of cones, and even Mayor Wayne went onto the cones. And I have to tell you that when I was a baby journalist in London, John Major, who was the Prime Minister that I covered most at that time, other than Thatcher, he created the Cones Hotline in about 1992. Which was a national, because there was the same debate in the UK about too many bloody cones getting in the way. And I tell you what, when somebody's granny drives into a ditch because there weren't enough cones. Now, look, I thought that and Bernard was nervous about this. I thought it would be wrong not to have you, or wrong to have you on and not ask you. You've had some kind of personal run-ins lately. One in Parliament. Presented this about the pressure on women MPs. Do you think that I mean, it's a slight, I don't mean to give you a slight slow ball, but do you think that women MPs are more in focus for their behaviour rather than men, or what?
I don't want to comment on my particular circumstances until the Privileges Committee has reported to Parliament.
Fair enough.
I just don't want to. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about it some other time.
No, please do, because I just think it would be bad not to ask you. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. I mean, I do think a lot of what happens in Parliament is very fake, and I don't love that. And just because I've been there a long time doesn't mean I'm used to it. So I feel like I have great hope for, what we can all achieve working together, and ultimately we do that at a political level, locally or central government. We have to make some of these decisions at that level, and I just don't want that to be a total game that puts people off. I think
you mean that it's all performative?
Yeah, and people want us to be working together and making informed decisions, and there is a certain aspect to it which, I don't know. It's
and so let me ask you. So we had no worries at all. We had Helen Clark on a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure you remember her. And one of the things that she raised and has raised is this question of misogyny in politics. And of course, we're going to see this rather writ large. We already have with the single barren cat lady, Kamala Harris now. How do you as a woman politician, how do we deal with this at a time when we've got, when misogyny is kind of widespread and you've got these kind of issues, and they become present in New Zealand as well? They come from overseas into New Zealand.
I don't have an answer to that, but I am happy to say that there's more women in Parliament than I think there are. Maybe not as many as there were last term, but there's a lot more in Parliament than when I was first elected, and I think that's a good thing. And there's a lot more young women in Parliament, and a lot more Māori and diverse backgrounds, and that's a good thing. But how do we ensure that it doesn't become too toxic to encourage new people?
And of course, rightly, one of our audience members, Sarah Planted, is saying to me, Don't ask her about this. Ask the men. It's their problem. So we're going to get Shane. We're going to get Shane and David on next week and have a bit of a stoush. Thank you so much. It's great to have you back on again. I've missed you, and I realised I've also missed Josie Pagani lately.
Yes, we will. We're really good. Really hoping we can get
Thanks
you
so
on again, Julianne, to talk.
My pleasure.
Talk transport and many other things, and good luck with that cough.
Thank you.
And
Thanks so much for coming on, and sorry it was a bit tricky getting you in.
No, that was partially my fault, but thank you.
That's right.
See you.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye. So, Peter, that's the end of the Hoon for today. I was going to say...
Well, are we going to do the skateboarding dog?
Yeah, do you have one?
We have got two excellent ones.
I'll go for it.
Well, they're both fishy stories. The things are a bit fishy. One is a 1 pound fish fell from the sky in New Jersey and smashed the windshield of a Tesla. And it turns out that it was a fish called a bluefish, and it was in a place where there are eagles who go fishing, and it brought it back, fell out of its claws because it had talon marks on it, and the Levine family of Ashbury Park are talking to their insurers to explain that a fish smashed the windscreen of their Tesla. Now the other fishy story.
That's a good headline in the email.
It is a good headline.
That's right. Accident because of falling fish.
Yes, exactly. Fish. Yeah. The other one and it was weirdly illustrated in the Times with a picture of a New Zealand naval ship intercepting a great wad of cocaine off New Zealand. which was the sharks off Brazil having been detected having quite high levels of cocaine, which may cause slight problems for Brazilians eating fish and chips.
Not to mention anyone who's anywhere near a shark. I would have thought the hyped up shark is a bad thing.
Exactly. I hadn't thought about that actually. Yeah, that's a very good. Good. I mean, as we know, both of us like fish and chips at the Fishmaster, and so but I think they do it out of Gurnard. I don't think there's too many cocaine ingesting Gurnard going on.
No. Good fun. Peter, lovely to see you again and to be on the Hoon. Great to be back. And we'll see what happens in the next 7 days in geopolitics in the world. It just does not stop. And there'll be plenty more for us to talk about.
Yeah, I think we need to do an emergency. Why don't we start doing emergency ones at about 3 a.m.? That's when you do all your rest of your work.
Boy, too many emergency podcasts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good fun. We will see you all later.
See you. And thanks for getting Julianne on and good old Robert.
Yeah, good stuff.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.